If you've been following American politics long enough, you already know that political hypocrisy isn't rare. But every once in a while, something happens that exposes it so clearly, so dramatically, that even longtime supporters struggle to explain it away. And right now, that moment is unfolding around Donald Trump's escalating military actions against Iran. Because the same political movement that built its identity on ending foreign wars is now celebrating one. And in the reaction from Trump's own allies, that might be the most revealing part of this entire story. I'm Christopher Reynolds, and today we're breaking down how a campaign built on promises of peace is colliding head-on with the reality of power. Section 1. The promise of no more wars. For nearly a decade, one of Donald Trump's strongest political selling points was simple and effective. He was the president who didn't start new wars. It became a cornerstone of his appeal, especially among voters exhausted by Iraq, Afghanistan, and decades of intervention overseas. At rallies, interviews, and campaign speeches, the message was repeated constantly. America first meant fewer foreign entanglements, less nation-building, less intervention, more focus at home. And politically, it worked. Many voters who normally distrusted Republican foreign policy embraced Trump precisely because he positioned himself as an outsider, rejecting traditional hawkish ideology. But now, with military escalation targeting Iran, that narrative is facing its biggest stress test yet. Because war, or even the perception of war, forces politicians to choose between rhetoric and reality. And suddenly, many of Trump's loudest supporters are choosing reality, while pretending nothing changed. Let's start with Vice President JD Vance. Not long ago, Vance warned explicitly that conflict with Iran would be a massive strategic mistake. He argued that war would drain American resources, distract from domestic priorities, and pull the country into another costly Middle Eastern conflict. That position aligned perfectly with the anti-intervention message that powered the movement politically. Fast forward to today. Instead of caution, we see celebration, social media posts portraying strength, resolve, and military action as proof of leadership. No long explanation, no acknowledgement of the earlier warnings, just a complete tonal shift. And he's not alone. Nikki Haley once emphasized that American prosperity depends on peace and stability, arguing that leadership meant stepping back from the brink of war. Now, military action is framed as a moral confrontation between good and evil. Same politician. My same geopolitical region, completely different framing. Then there's Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, who previously criticized endless wars, regime change policies, and interventionism as failures of the old political establishment. Yet today, the language sounds remarkably familiar to the very policies he once condemned: consequences, strength, and unavoidable confrontation. And perhaps the sharpest reversal comes from Stephen Miller, who previously warned voters that Democrats would send Americans into foreign wars. Now, military sacrifice is described as noble and necessary. The messaging didn't gradually evolve. It flipped, almost overnight. What makes this moment especially striking is that Donald Trump himself predicted this exact scenario years ago. Back in the early 2000s, Trump repeatedly accused President Barack Obama of potentially starting a war with Iran for political advantage. He argued that leaders sometimes use military conflict to boost political standing before elections. He said it openly, repeatedly. He warned Americans to be skeptical of sudden military escalation. And now, critics argue, the same logic is being applied to Trump himself. Whether that comparison is fair depends on your political perspective, but the irony is undeniable. Because Trump didn't just oppose war, he framed himself as uniquely resistant to it. He promised voters they wouldn't see new conflicts under his leadership. He insisted global crises would not escalate if he were president, and those promises became central to his political identity, which is why today's developments feel so jarring to many observers, including some former supporters. Not everyone in Trump's political orbit is celebrating. Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, usually one of Trump's most loyal allies, expressed rare public frustration. Her argument wasn't subtle. She reminded followers that the movement promised no more foreign wars, no regime change, no endless conflicts overseas. She framed the current escalation as a betrayal of voters who believed America would finally step away from interventionist policies. And whether you agree with her or not, see, her reaction highlights something important. This isn't just criticism from political opponents, it's disagreement from inside the coalition itself. But voices like hers remain the minority. For every critic questioning the shift, many supporters appear eager to reinterpret events in ways that preserve loyalty. Online commentators who once insisted war would never happen under Trump now celebrate military action with enthusiasm. The contradiction isn't ignored, it's absorbed. Narratives adjust, positions evolve, and political identity remains intact. This raises a larger question that extends beyond any single president. Do political movements follow principles or personalities? Because when policies change but support remains constant, something deeper is happening. Political psychologists often describe this as identity alignment, when political allegiance becomes tied not to specific policies, but to belonging within a group. In that environment, consistency becomes less important than loyalty, and criticism feels like betrayal rather than debate. That dynamic explains why dramatic policy reversals rarely fracture modern political coalitions as much as analysts expect. Supporters don't necessarily abandon leaders. Instead, they reinterpret events to maintain internal coherence. In other words, reality adjusts to fit the narrative, not the other way around. Critics argue that this pattern isn't limited to foreign policy. They point to economic promises, lowering prices, reducing inflation, protecting entitlement programs, and claim outcomes haven't matched campaign rhetoric. Supporters counter that global conditions and political opposition complicate implementation. But regardless of which side you believe, the broader pattern remains central to Trump's political style: bold promises, strong messaging, and flexible interpretation once governing begins. To admirers, that flexibility is pragmatic leadership. To critics, it's evidence that ideology comes second to political survival. Another layer of this story involves media itself. Independent commentators increasingly argue that political discourse is shaped by algorithms, platforms, and billionaire-owned tech companies. The fear among some creators is that critical voices could be suppressed depending on political pressure or corporate interests. Whether those concerns are justified or exaggerated is heavily debated. But what's undeniable is that political communication today depends less on traditional journalism and more on decentralized online ecosystems. And that means narratives form faster and polarize faster than ever before. So why does this particular controversy matter? Because wars, or potential wars, clarify political priorities in ways speeches never can. Economic promises can be debated. Legislation can stall. But military action forces immediate moral and political positioning. You either support it or question it. And in doing so, politicians reveal which commitments are negotiable and which are not. For Trump supporters, who valued his anti-war stance above everything else, this moment creates a genuine dilemma. For critics, it confirms long-standing warnings about inconsistency. And for the broader public, it serves as a reminder that campaign rhetoric and governing reality often diverge dramatically. In politics, contradictions aren't new. Every administration faces decisions that collide with earlier promises. But what makes this moment unique is how clearly the contrast appears. A movement built on ending foreign wars, now defending military escalation. Allies reversing positions within months, and a political figure confronting accusations he once aimed at others. And the real question isn't whether politicians change their minds. They always do. The question is whether voters notice, and whether it changes anything. Because ultimately, political power depends less on consistency than on perception. And right now, the perception battle surrounding Iran may shape not just Trump's presidency, but the future identity of the movement that brought him back to power. I'm Christopher Reynolds. If you found this analysis valuable, make sure to subscribe and stay tuned. Because in today's political climate, the story never ends where it begins.